James Miller stepped through the front door of his suburban home, feeling a swell of contentment as he hung his keys on the hook by the entrance. It was early evening, and the scent of Laura's homemade lasagna wafted from the kitchen. The sound of laughter echoed down the hallway. His children, Sophie and Liam, were giggling about something. James smiled to himself. This is what I work so hard for, he thought, shrugging off his suit jacket. A loving family, a beautiful home, and dinner on the table. On the surface, life was perfect. In the dining room, 12-year-old Sophie was attempting to teach 8-year-old Liam how to fold an origami crane from a scrap of paper. She tossed her long brown hair over her shoulder and huffed in mock exasperation as Liam crumpled the paper yet again. No, like this, silly, she laughed. Liam stuck out his tongue in concentration. James paused in the doorway, watching his children with affectionate pride. Sophie had Laura's bright green eyes and the same determined set to her jaw when she was focused. Liam, with his mop of dark curls and dimpled grin, was the spitting image of James at that age. They were his world. Laura appeared from the kitchen carrying a baking dish, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun, cheeks flushed from the warmth of the oven. She was effortlessly beautiful to James, just as stunning as the day he married her 14 years ago. Perfect timing, hun, she greeted him warmly. Dinner's ready. She set the lasagna on a trivet and looked up at him with a smile that lit up her face. For a moment, James felt a surge of love and gratitude. Despite the pressures of his job as a financial analyst and her days managing the household and her part-time interior design projects, they always tried to have family dinner together. These moments meant everything to him. They gathered around the table. James took his usual seat at the head, with Laura to his right and the kids across from them. As Laura served generous portions of cheesy pasta, Sophie launched into a recounting of her day at school, how she aced her math quiz, and how a boy in her class got his hoodie stuck in the door, sending the class into fits of laughter. Liam added sound effects and gestures to his sister's story, making everyone chuckle. James reached over to squeeze Laura's hand, sharing a quiet smile with her amidst the children's chatter. He believed this was the picture of happiness. A supportive wife, happy kids, and peace at home after a long day. After dinner, the family moved to the living room. It was a cozy space decorated in warm tones, Laura's touch, of course, with her designer's eye. They settled on the couch for a short TV episode that the kids loved. Sophie curled up under James's arm, while Liam sat on the rug, eyes glued to the screen. Laura nestled at the opposite end of the couch, her legs tucked under her. James glanced at her and found her already looking back at him with a soft, contented expression. In that quiet exchange, he felt a rush of warmth. He thought, I'm so lucky. In return, Laura's lips curved into a small smile before she turned her attention back to the show. When the episode ended, it was the kids' bedtime. Amid mild protests, Sophie and Liam gave their parents goodnight hugs. James lifted Liam up playfully, making airplane noises as he carried him down the hall to his bedroom, eliciting a peal of laughter. Sophie trailed behind, rolling her eyes at her little brother's antics but smiling nonetheless. After tucking Liam in and reminding Sophie not to stay up late on her tablet, James closed their doors gently. He stood for a moment in the hallway, listening as Laura murmured a lullaby to Liam from his bedside, an old habit of hers. The melody was soft and soothing. James's heart felt full. This was the life he had always dreamed of. Later, as James entered the master bedroom, he loosened his tie and let out a tired sigh. Laura was in the ensuite bathroom finishing her nighttime routine. Through the slightly ajar door, he could see her wiping off makeup and applying moisturizer, the diamond of her wedding ring glinting under the light. James sat on the edge of the bed and picked up a framed photo from the nightstand, his favorite picture of the family from last summer's beach vacation. In it, Laura stood in a sundress and floppy hat, radiant as the sun, with Sophie and Liam on either side of her grinning, and James behind them with his arms around them all. Everyone looked so carefree and happy. What more could a man ask for, he thought. He put the photo back and began unbuttoning his shirt. It was in that quiet moment, with the kids asleep and the house calm, that he first heard it. Laura's voice, low and tense, coming from the bathroom. At first, James assumed she was talking to him, but her words were too hushed and urgent, as if she was on the phone. He paused, one sock off, listening. "I know, I miss you too," Laura was saying softly. James frowned. Who could she be talking to at this hour, in that tone? He heard a faint buzz of a voice in response. She must have answered a call on her cell. Curiosity piqued, but not yet alarmed, James kept still, not wanting to interrupt if it was something private. Laura's voice came again, a whisper this time. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. Yes, I promise. Tomorrow at the usual place. I can't wait either." James's heart gave a curious jolt. He doesn't suspect a thing. The sock in his hand dropped to the floor. There was a short pause, and then Laura spoke again, her voice almost tender. "I love you." The floorboard creaked under James's foot as he shifted. Immediately, Laura's words cut off. A second later, the bathroom door opened. Laura peeked out, phone in hand. When she saw James sitting on the bed, she startled slightly. "Oh," she said, too brightly. "I didn't know you were already in here." James tried to keep his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. He felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, nodding toward the phone in her hand. Laura's eyes flickered. For a fraction of a second, he thought he saw a flash of panic there, but she blinked and it was gone, replaced by a casual smile. "Just Melanie," she replied smoothly, mentioning her sister's name. "She called to remind me about our parents' anniversary next week. You know how she loves to talk." Laura rolled her eyes playfully and stepped out of the bathroom, slipping her phone into her pocket. She crossed the room and gave James a quick peck on the cheek. "Sorry if I disturbed you." James forced a chuckle. "No, it's fine," he said, though his chest felt tight. Up close, Laura smelled of vanilla and her familiar floral perfume. She looked the same as she always did. Loving, warm, innocent. Am I imagining things? He wondered. The conversation he overheard was odd, certainly, but Laura had given a plausible explanation. Perhaps he had misheard. The sound in the bathroom could have muffled her words, and he hadn't caught the whole thing. He tried to tell himself he must be mistaken. Laura would never lie to him. "Everything okay?" Laura asked, tilting her head at him as she climbed into bed. James realized he was just standing there, one sock off, a faraway look in his eyes. He shook himself and managed to smile. "Yeah, I'm good. Just tired from work." He joined her in bed, but as he turned off the lamp and darkness draped the room, the doubt began to creep in again. As Laura snuggled against him, already drifting toward sleep, James stared at the ceiling. In the silence, the words he'd overheard replayed in his mind. He doesn't suspect a thing. The usual place. I miss you. And the way she had cut herself off mid-sentence, I love you. She had almost sounded like, no. He must have misinterpreted it. Laura loved him, and she would never betray him. Derek's face flickered across his mind. His best friend, practically family. If something was wrong, Derek would have noticed, right? But Derek had been acting completely normal the last time they met. Despite his attempts at reassurance, James felt a gnawing worry take hold. Lying there in the dark with his wife sleeping peacefully beside him, he felt the first crack in his illusion of happiness. He told himself again it was nothing. Perhaps he was just stressed and imagining problems that didn't exist. Eventually, exhaustion from the day overtook him. But even as he drifted into a fitful sleep, one thought remained in the back of his mind. What if my perfect life isn't as perfect as it seems? Chapter 2. The Unveiling. James awoke the next morning with a weight on his chest and a churning in his gut. He hadn't slept well, The snippets of Laura's murmured conversation kept echoing in his mind. Over coffee, he studied Laura surreptitiously. She hummed lightly as she packed the kids' lunches, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. Everything about her seemed normal. Affectionate smiles, a peck on his cheek as she handed him a travel mug, reminders about Sophie's soccer practice that evening. For a moment, James felt foolish for doubting her. Perhaps he really had misheard. But as Laura loaded the kids into her SUV to drive them to school, James's unease resurfaced. The way she had so smoothly lied about talking to her sister, it gnawed at him. Once the house was quiet, he decided to make a discreet call. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Melanie's number under the pretense of discussing her parents' upcoming anniversary. It only took a short conversation for James to confirm what he feared. Laura hadn't spoken to her sister at all that week. The anniversary reminder story was a complete lie. They ended the call pleasantly enough, but James stood alone in the kitchen, heart pounding in his ears. She lied to me. Laura hadn't been talking to Melanie at all last night. She had outright lied to his face. So who was she really talking to, he wondered, though a sickening guess already swirled in his mind. He had to know the truth. Resolute, James decided to investigate. That afternoon, he left work early, unable to focus with his thoughts in turmoil. Laura would be out for a while yet. She often stopped for groceries or errands after picking up the kids from school, and Sophie had soccer practice. It gave him a window of a couple of hours. He sat at his home office desk, opening Laura's laptop, which was sitting on the charger. It prompted him for a password. James tried a few obvious ones: Laura's birthday, Sophie's name, even password 123 with a humorless huff, but none worked. Chewing his lip, he realized Laura must have chosen something unique. Next, he picked up the handset of the landline phone sitting on his desk. They rarely used it except for work calls, but it had a caller ID memory. Scrolling through recent calls, he didn't find anything unusual. He then checked his cell phone bill online for Laura's number records. As he scanned the list of calls and texts, one number kept recurring late at night and during the day when he wasn't home. His breath caught when he recognized it: Derek's cell. There were dozens of calls and text messages between Laura and Derek over the past few months, far more than James could recall in normal circumstances. They talked almost every day, sometimes multiple times. Many of the calls were at odd hours, like mid-afternoon or late at night when James was still at the office or already asleep. A hot flush crept up James's neck. Seeing the stark evidence of frequent secret communication between his wife and his closest friend sent his mind reeling. Calm down, he urged himself. Maybe it's innocent. Derek was his buddy. They'd known each other since college. Laura and Derek got along well. Derek was practically part of the family, often coming over for barbecues or joining them for movie nights if he was in town. As a regional sales manager, Derek traveled often, but they still hung out regularly. It wasn't strange for Derek to call Laura about surprising James or coordinating gifts. He had done that once for James's birthday. But this many calls? And Laura hiding it? It screamed that something was very wrong. James's hands trembled as he exited the phone bill. He realized the evidence might be on Laura's phone itself. She usually kept it close, but maybe... He remembered that Laura often plugged her phone into the charger in the kitchen while cooking dinner. Perhaps the phone's lock code was something he could guess. He rifled through his memory. Laura sometimes used patterns like the kids' birthdays. Just then, he heard the garage door rumble open. James's stomach flipped. She was home, earlier than he expected, probably having dropped Sophie at practice first. He hastily shut the laptop and stepped out of the office, trying to appear casual. Laura came in carrying a couple of grocery bags. "Oh, hey, I didn't know you'd be home," she said, surprised. "Slow day at work," James lied, managing a smile. He took one of the bags from her to help. "Thought I'd start the weekend early." "That's nice," Laura responded, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. She seemed a bit nervous for a split second, but then she started unpacking groceries and chatting about an upcoming school event. James nodded along, distracted, the phone log still fresh in his mind. Over the next couple of days, James continued to look for an opening. He felt like a stranger in his own home, watching his wife's every move behind a veneer of normalcy. Nights were the worst, lying next to Laura, knowing she was likely texting Derek under the covers or waiting for James to fall asleep to slip out and call him. The betrayal festered in James's chest, but he needed concrete proof. He didn't dare confront her with only phone records. He needed to see it with his own eyes, no matter how painful. The opportunity came on a Sunday afternoon. Derek had called that morning, mentioning he was going to be out of town for a week on business. James recalled Laura's whispered, "Tomorrow at the usual place," from the phone call he overheard. Tomorrow. If her lover was Derek and he was going away, perhaps they intended to meet before his trip. The thought turned James's stomach, but he realized something. If they were meeting tomorrow, there might be messages about it today. Laura was in the backyard gardening while Liam played on the swing set. Sophie was at a friend's house. Laura had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. James saw it unattended and seized the moment. Heart thudding, he unplugged the phone and tapped the screen. It was locked with a pin. Taking a deep breath, he tried an old combination Laura once used for her luggage. Her birth month and day, 0721. The phone clicked open. He nearly sagged with relief. He thumbed through her recent texts. There were innocent threads with friends and family, nothing suspicious. Until he saw a thread with Derek's name. It was muted, a tiny crossed-out bell icon next to it, as if she'd silenced notifications. Opening it, James felt his pulse roaring in his ears. The chat history was still there. The most recent messages were from this morning. Derek. Can't wait to see you tomorrow? Usual spot at 1? Laura. Yes. I'll say I have a client meeting. I need you? Last week was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Derek. Me neither. Love you. Laura. Love you too. James's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. He scrolled up, his eyes devouring the evidence of their affair. There were explicit text exchanges from weeks past. Laura and Derek discussing nights they'd spent together when James was on business trips, flirty banter about stolen kisses during a neighborhood barbecue when James had been busy grilling just yards away, and even mentions of intimate acts that made James's face burn with humiliation. Attached images loaded as he scrolled. A selfie of Laura in nothing but lingerie blowing a kiss. Another of Derek lying shirtless in what looked like a hotel bed, grinning. And then, one that made James's vision blur with rage. A photo of Laura and Derek together, entangled on a bed, her bare shoulders exposed under rumpled sheets, Derek's arms around her. The date stamp on the photo was from 2 months ago. On a weekend, James had taken the kids camping, while Laura claimed she needed a quiet weekend at home to work on a design project. James's chest constricted. He couldn't breathe. A wave of nausea surged, and he barely made it to the sink before heaving. He pressed a fist to his mouth, tears of anger and hurt stinging his eyes as he steadied himself. Each line of those messages was a dagger to his heart. Each photo, a twisted reminder of his wife's betrayal and his best friend's treachery. He knew now there was no mistake. The life he thought was real had been a lie. Laura and Derek, two people he trusted most in the world, had been carrying on an affair right under his nose. James turned off the phone screen, his mind racing. What was he going to do? Part of him wanted to confront Laura that very instant, to scream and demand answers. Another part of him felt an overwhelming grief, a sense of loss for the happy marriage he thought he had. He needed proof if there was to be any confrontation or fallout. With trembling fingers, James forwarded the damning emails and photos to his own email account, ensuring he had copies that Laura couldn't easily erase. He also took pictures of the text conversation with his phone, just in case. Evidence, he thought grimly. He couldn't believe he even had to think in those terms about his own wife and friend. but the situation was beyond his worst nightmares. As he finished, he heard the patio door slide open. Laura's voice called, "James, can you help me with something in the garden?" James's heart hammered. He quickly placed her phone back on the counter exactly as it was and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. He splashed water on his face to hide any tear stains. Staring at his reflection in the kitchen window, he saw a man whose eyes had been opened to a cruel truth. The hurt was quickly hardening into resolve. "Coming!" he answered, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. He walked out to the yard, each step heavy. There was Laura kneeling by her rose bushes, trowel in hand, looking as if nothing in the world was amiss. She glanced up with a warm smile that made James's blood boil. How could she sit there and smile at him so sweetly after doing something so vile? Every fiber of him wanted to shout, to demand how long she'd been deceiving him, to ask if any of their years together had even been real. But he knew this confrontation shouldn't happen in front of Liam, who was still playing nearby, blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit his family. So James swallowed his fury and helped her pull a stubborn weed, nodding mechanically as she chatted about how she might rearrange the flower beds. Inside, his heart crumbled, piece by piece, under the weight of her betrayal. That night, James could barely look at Laura. At dinner, he was quiet, pushing his food around his plate. Laura was preoccupied on her phone, likely texting Derek about their upcoming rendezvous, James thought bitterly. Every so often, she'd glance at James, and he could sense her caution, perhaps noticing something off about his demeanor. He tried to keep his face blank, but his silence spoke volumes. He excused himself right after eating, claiming a headache, leaving Laura to handle the kids' bedtime. James paced in his office, emotions swinging wildly between devastation and anger. One moment he was on the verge of sobbing as he pictured the loving moments he'd shared with Laura that were now tainted memories. The next, he was clenching his fists, seething that Derek, the man he'd considered a brother, had been sleeping with his wife. His thoughts raced. Should I confront Derek? The urge to punch his so-called friend's lights out was almost overwhelming. But Derek was conveniently out of town, and the real confrontation needed to be with Laura. When Laura finally came to bed, James pretended to be asleep. He couldn't bear to talk to her, not with what he knew. He felt the mattress shift as she slipped under the covers. She let out a quiet sigh, and after a long while, her breathing evened. She had fallen asleep. James lay awake, eyes open, staring into the darkness, while his wife slept soundly next to him, as if nothing were wrong. That sense of unreality came back. Hours ago, he had uncovered the ugliest truth imaginable. Yet here they were in the silent night, a mere few inches apart but worlds away. The next morning, James decided he couldn't keep the charade any longer. The knowledge was burning a hole in him. After dropping the kids at school, Laura had an early client meeting, or so she claimed, more likely meeting Derek as planned. He returned home to find Laura in the kitchen, dressed smartly and putting on a light jacket. "You're back early. Everything okay?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. James closed the front door behind him. He felt oddly calm now, a cool determination settling over his anger like a frost. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Something in his tone made Laura pause as she was reaching for her car keys. "Can it wait? I'm running late to meet a client," she said, not meeting his eyes. "A client? Right." James's voice was tight. "Drop the act, Laura. I know." Laura's hand froze midair. Slowly, she turned to face him. "Know what?" she asked, but he could hear it, the quiver beneath her forced lightness. James stepped forward and placed his phone on the counter between them. The screen was open to one of the incriminating photos of Laura and Derek entangled together. Laura's eyes widened, and all color drained from her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Laura's eyes darted from the phone to James's face. Her lips parted soundlessly. The kitchen clock ticked in the background. Finally, in a low, shaking voice, James asked, Why, Laura? How could you do this to me? To our family? His composure cracked as he spoke, voice thick with pain. Derek, of all people, my best friend. How long have you been lying to me? Laura's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She looked as though she might be sick. James, she stammered, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. I can explain. Explain? James echoed bitterly, a wave of anger surging. Explain how you and Derek have been sneaking around behind my back? How you've been pretending to love me while doing this. He jabbed a finger at the phone, where that damning image still glowed. Go on, Laura. I'm listening. She flinched at his tone. A tear spilled down her cheek. It just happened, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. James let out a bark of disbelief. Never meant to hurt me? You've destroyed me, Laura. His voice rose, echoing off the kitchen walls. I trusted you. I trusted him. Our kids. Do you even realize what this will do to Sophie and Liam? Keep your voice down, Laura hissed suddenly, glancing toward the doorway as if the ghosts of their children might hear. Her face was flushed now, an edge of defensiveness cutting through her initial shock. We can't wake the neighbors. To James, her concern about others hearing was a slap in the face. That's what you care about right now? Appearances? He shook his head in disgust. God, who are you? Because I don't know the woman standing in front of me anymore. Laura wiped her cheeks, her expression hardening. You're not exactly blameless here, James, she snapped, surprising him. Yes, I screwed up. Screwed up, he interrupted, voice dripping with sarcasm. That's what you call carrying on an affair for how long? Months? Years? Nearly a year, she said, before she could stop herself. James felt that as a punch to the gut. A year of lies. Laura rushed on. It was a mistake. I felt lonely, and Derek was there for me. You were always at work or on trips. I was here holding everything together and feeling invisible. Her words tumbled out in a torrent now, excuses he'd heard cheaters make a million times on TV, but never imagined hearing from his own wife. So it's my fault? James asked, incredulous. His hands balled into fists at his sides. I was working to provide for us, to give you this life, and apparently that meant nothing to you. That's not true, she shot back. It's just, you didn't have time for me anymore. We stopped communicating. Derek listened. He understood what I was going through. I never planned for it to go so far. Her voice wavered, perhaps realizing how feeble it sounded. James stared at her, a bitter taste in his mouth. He remembered the nights he'd stayed late at the office to meet deadlines, believing Laura supported his career. The times he'd come home exhausted. Maybe he had been distant on those occasions, but nothing that justified this kind of betrayal. So your solution to feeling lonely was to sleep with my best friend? He said quietly. That's garbage, Laura, and you know it. You could have talked to me, suggested counseling. Hell, even yelled at me. But cheating, sneaking around with Derek? He broke off, shaking his head as another wave of pain threatened to break his composure. He would not break down in front of her, he told himself. He wouldn't give her that satisfaction to see how deeply she'd wounded him. Laura's eyes flashed with a mix of guilt and irritation. She seemed to sense that apologies would not get her out of this. So she changed tack. What do you intend to do, James? She asked, her tone cooling. We can't unring this bell. If you want a divorce, fine. She lifted her chin, and in that moment James saw a steely resolve in her, almost defiance. Maybe that would be for the best. The words hung in the air. Divorce. Hearing it out loud made James's stomach lurch. He had imagined shouting, crying, perhaps even begging her to fix this, but not this icy, straightforward suggestion from her. There was no pleading in her voice for forgiveness, no promise to break it off with Derek, or try to salvage their marriage. Instead, she sounded almost eager to end it. Did she even feel sorry? Or had she already mentally checked out of their life together? "You're really doing this," James said, voice hollow. It wasn't even a question. He realized with dawning horror that she wanted out. She wanted to be with Derek. All those nights of lies, the secret plans. She was ready to discard their years together, without a fight. Laura straightened, smoothing her jacket with a shaky hand. "It's obvious you'll never forgive me," she said quietly. "And I don't want to live like this, in shame. Maybe it's better if we both move on?" She paused, then added with a hard edge, "And don't think I'll let you make this difficult. I'm going to file for divorce and I'll make sure I get what I deserve out of it." James felt a spike of alarm through his anger. "What you deserve," he repeated. "Laura, you're the one who ruined this marriage. You think you deserve anything from me after what you've done?" Her eyes narrowed. "I sacrificed years for this family. I put my career on hold to raise our children. Don't you dare act like I'm not entitled to a fair share. I'll be seeking the house, full custody of Sophie and Liam, and yes, alimony. My lawyer will be in touch." The rehearsed precision of her words was chilling. It dawned on James that perhaps Derek and she had already talked through this scenario. Derek was always cunning and resourceful. If he convinced Laura to leave James, he would make sure she planned to take as much as possible. James felt a flash of betrayal so intense he had to grip the counter to steady himself. He looked at the woman he once knew as his loving wife and scarcely recognized her now. There was a cold determination in Laura's tear-streaked face. Whether born out of guilt or emboldened by Derek's promises, she was ready to go on the offensive. A wave of despair crashed over James as the reality settled like lead in his chest. His marriage was over, shattered in an instant. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone who seemed set on hurting him even further. Their children, their home, everything was now on the line. Laura picked up her car keys with a shaky hand. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight," she murmured. "I'll come by for my things later." There was a flicker of something in her expression. Regret, fear, it was hard to tell. But she quickly steeled herself. "This is for the best, James. For both of us." With that, she turned and walked out the front door, leaving James standing in the kitchen in stunned silence. The screen of his phone had gone dark, but he didn't need to look at it to remember the betrayal it revealed. The house felt impossibly quiet. The kids were still at school, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. James sank into a chair, trembling. In the span of minutes, his life had been upended. He stared blankly at the half-cleared breakfast table, at the 2 mugs from which he and Laura had sipped coffee mere hours ago as a normal married couple. A ragged sob escaped his throat, and he covered his face with his hands. He had never felt so hurt, so angry, so lost all at once. Up until yesterday, he had thought he was the luckiest man alive. Now that illusion was gone, replaced by a nightmare reality. His wife was leaving him for his best friend, and she intended to take everything, his home, his children, his dignity, on her way out. As the grandfather clock in the living room chimed the hour, James realized with cold dread that this was just the beginning of a far more painful journey. Laura would lawyer up, and the battle ahead would be brutal. He knew one thing for certain through the haze of pain. His life would never be the same again. The unveiling of the betrayal had shattered not only his heart, but the very foundation of the world he had built. Chapter 3. Falling Apart. True to her word, Laura filed for divorce within days. The week following the confrontation was a blur of agony for James. Laura had taken Sophie and Liam to stay at her sister's house for a while. A terse text informed him of this the day she left. He found himself in an eerily silent home, the absence of his children's laughter almost too much to bear. He wandered the empty house like a ghost, the echoes of happier times haunting every room. Sophie's drawings still decorated the fridge, Liam's toys lay scattered in the living room where he'd left them. Evidence of the life that had been so normal and joyful just a week ago, now shattered. One evening, James mustered the courage to call the kids. It had been 3 days since he'd last seen them. His heart ached with longing. Sophie answered the phone. "Hi, sweetie," James began softly, his throat tight. "Hi." Sophie's voice was quiet, hesitant. In the background, he could hear Liam and the muffled sound of a TV. "How are you and your brother? I miss you both so much," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. "We're okay," Sophie replied. There was a pause. "We're at Aunt Melanie's. Mom said we'll be here for a bit." James swallowed. "I know. That's okay. Listen, what Mom and I are going through, it's not your fault, all right? We both love you and Liam, so much." Sophie didn't respond to that. When she spoke again, her voice had a slight tremble. "Mom said you and she had a big fight, that you don't want to live with us anymore." The words came out small and uncertain, but they pierced James straight through. "What?" he gasped. "Sophie, no, that's not true. I would never." He heard rustling as if the phone was being moved, and suddenly Laura's voice came on, cold and sharp. "This isn't the time, James. The kids are still processing everything. Please don't confuse them." "Confuse them? Laura, I just don't want them thinking I chose to leave." James burst out, desperation creeping into his voice. Laura's tone was icy. "You left us with no choice when you went crazy at me. They don't need details. Just give them space. We can arrange a visit later." Before he could reply, the line went dead. James stared at the phone, feeling as if he'd been punched. "She's poisoning them against me," he realized with horror. The call left him shaking and sick to his stomach. He spent that night on the living room couch, clutching a family photo in his hands, tears soaking the darkness as he wondered how the love of his life had become someone he could hardly recognize. The divorce process escalated quickly. Laura's attorney served papers alleging irreconcilable differences within a week, and with them came a temporary arrangement. Laura was to reside in the family home with the children, and James was to vacate immediately to avoid further conflict. It was worded to sound mutual, but James knew it was engineered by Laura's side. She had indeed returned to claim the house, walking in with her lawyer's letter and a police officer in tow to ensure a peaceful transition, while James gathered some personal belongings. Standing in what used to be his living room, watching an officer patrol his halls as if he were a threat, was utterly humiliating. "Daddy, where are you going?" Liam's small voice had asked as James hastily packed a suitcase that day. The kids had been brought home under supervision for this event, apparently as a show of maintaining stability with their mother in the house. Liam's big brown eyes were filled with confusion and fear. James knelt to hug his son tightly, his heart breaking. "I have to go stay somewhere else for a little while, buddy," he explained, trying to keep his voice gentle and soothing despite the lump in his throat. "But I'll see you very soon, okay? I promise. I love you so much." Liam clung to his neck. "Love you, Dad," he whispered, trembling. Sophie stood a few steps away, arms crossed protectively over her chest. She was biting her lip hard, eyes shiny with tears she refused to let fall. James reached out a hand to her. "Sophie, sweetheart." She didn't move for a moment, then she took a hesitant step forward and let him pull her into a hug. He felt her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she mumbled into his shirt. Those two words shattered him. She was apologizing, as if any of this was her fault. "No, Soph, oh no! You have nothing to be sorry for," James choked out, stroking her hair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry this is happening. I love you and your brother more than anything." He kissed the top of her head, wishing he could freeze time and hold his children forever. "All right, that's enough," came Laura's voice from the doorway. She sounded impatient and oddly threatened. Perhaps because seeing the children cling to their father complicated the narrative she'd spun. Sophie quickly wiped her eyes and stepped back to her mother's side. James looked at Laura pleadingly. "We'll set up a schedule for visits," she said briskly, avoiding his gaze. "Come on, kids." And just like that, James was escorted out of his own house, a few suitcases of clothes and personal items, all he could take for now. The last sight as he pulled out of the driveway was Sophie and Liam standing in the doorway, Laura's hand on their shoulders. Liam was openly crying. Sophie's face was turned into her mother's sleeve, her shoulders still quivering. James had to force himself to drive away, tears blurring the road as he left the neighborhood, his heart in tatters. He moved into a small furnished apartment across town, the only place he could find on such short notice that he could afford after accounting for the looming legal fees and the support he knew was coming. The apartment was a far cry from the spacious home he'd built with Laura. Beige walls, a lumpy couch, 2 small bedrooms, one of which he immediately thought could be set up for the kids' visits, though he had no idea when those would happen regularly. He spent the first night on that couch, staring at the ceiling until dawn, the silence pounding in his ears. The weeks that followed were the darkest of James's life. He met with a divorce attorney, a sympathetic man named Richard, who tried to prepare him for the battle ahead. "She's asking for full custody and significant child support, as well as alimony," Richard reported during their meeting with a grim expression. "It looks like they're painting you as an absent father and, insinuating you have anger issues that make the home environment unstable." James's head swam. "Anger issues? I would never hurt my kids," he exclaimed. Richard held up a pacifying hand. "I know. It's a tactic. They mention an explosive confrontation as the catalyst for separation. No physical violence alleged, just that you yelled in a rage, causing the children emotional distress. They're leveraging that incident to suggest you might not provide a stable environment. And since Laura has been the primary caregiver, the court will lean toward maintaining continuity for the kids with her, at least initially." James felt sick. He realized that by confronting Laura and then being forced out, he had played right into this narrative. "This is insane," he muttered. "She betrayed me, but I'm the one being treated like a villain." Richard sighed. "Unfortunately, family court isn't about punishing infidelity. It's about the best interests of the children. Unless her affair somehow endangered the kids, it won't matter to the judge. What matters is who's been their main caretaker and where they'll ostensibly be most comfortable." He hesitated. "How old are your children again?" "Sophie is 12, Liam is 8, James answered, already knowing where this was going. "Old enough for their preferences to carry some weight, especially Sophie," the lawyer said gently. "If they express a strong desire to stay primarily with their mother, the court will consider it." James's shoulders slumped. If Laura had swayed them to her side, he might lose them by their own choice, however unfairly influenced that choice was. The thought of his children believing he didn't want them, or that he was the cause of this upheaval, was almost unbearable. As the divorce proceedings advanced, James found himself going through the motions in a haze of despair. At work, he managed to hold on to his job by a thread, though his boss was less than pleased by his distracted focus and occasional days off for legal meetings or court dates. Friends and coworkers noticed his gaunt appearance and hollow eyes. Some tried to express support or invite him out for a drink, but James often declined, withdrawing from nearly everyone. How could he explain that his entire life had imploded? The gossip grapevine in their social circle certainly buzzed with the news. An ugly divorce, whispers that Laura had run off with another man. But James was too ashamed and broken to correct rumors or confide in anyone deeply. The few visits he managed with his kids were strained and heartbreaking. Once, he met them at a nearby park under Laura's wary supervision. She sat on a bench at a distance, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. Sophie was polite but distant, clearly feeling pulled in loyalty. Liam clung to James and chattered about trivial things, seemingly just happy to see his dad. But when it was time to leave, he burst into tears, not wanting to let go of James's hand. Laura swooped in, giving James a warning look as if he'd caused the scene, and peeled their son away. "Say goodbye to your father," she said firmly, and Liam hiccuped a goodbye through sobs. James had returned to his lonely apartment that day and punched the wall, skinning his knuckles before collapsing into grief. The final divorce hearing came on a gray autumn morning about 6 months after the initial filing. James felt a surreal numbness as he sat in the family court, listening to lawyers argue as if he were merely a case number. Laura was there, poised and composed in a navy dress, Derek at her side in the gallery. It was the first time James had seen Derek in person since before the confrontation. Catching sight of his old friend's face, someone he'd laughed and shared beers with countless times, now evoked a wave of rage and hurt so strong James had to grip the edge of the table. Derek had the decency to avoid James's eyes, but he kept a reassuring hand on Laura's back. The betrayal was shoved in James's face, yet he had to stay focused on what mattered: Sophie and Liam. Despite his lawyer's best efforts, the outcome was a near-total defeat for James. The judge, citing the need for stability, granted Laura primary physical custody of the children. James was given visitation, every other weekend and a few hours one evening per week. Joint legal custody in name, but Laura would be the one with the children day in, day out. The marital home was to remain with Laura and the kids, at least until they reached adulthood, after which it could be sold and equity split, meaning James wouldn't see a penny of that for many years. In the meantime, he was obligated to continue paying the mortgage. Additionally, because he earned significantly more than Laura, who had only part-time income from interior design, James was ordered to pay child support and alimony. The alimony wasn't permanent. 5 years rehabilitative, the judge said, since the marriage was over a decade long and Laura would need time to become fully self-sufficient. But it was a sizable monthly sum nonetheless. James felt hollow as the judge read the decision. None of his arguments, that Laura's affair had broken up the marriage, that he was a devoted father, that he'd happily shared parenting before this, none of it seemed to matter. In the eyes of the court, he was the secondary parent now, and a wallet to fulfill financial responsibilities. Laura's attorney had painted her as the sympathetic mother doing her best in a tough situation. And because James had been working long hours, to support the family ironically, it was easy to cast him as less involved, regardless of how much love and care he had given whenever he was home. When the gavel came down, finalizing the decree, James felt something inside him collapse. It was over. 14 years of marriage. Gone. He glanced over at Laura. She was hugging her attorney, relief evident on her face. Derek was nodding with a tight smile. They looked like they'd won. And they had. At least for now, James thought bitterly. His gaze then found Sophie and Liam, who sat in the second row with Melanie, having been brought for the outcome. Sophie was stone-faced, staring at the floor. Liam looked confused, not fully understanding the legalities, but sensing the emotional currents. James wanted to rush over to tell them he loved them, that he wasn't abandoning them, that he would always fight for them. But all he could do was catch Sophie's eye as she looked up. He offered a faint, sad smile. She quickly wiped at her eyes and turned away, as Melanie ushered the kids out of the courtroom with Laura. As James stepped outside the courthouse that day, the crisp air felt hard to breathe. Richard, his attorney, patted his shoulder and murmured something about appeal options and staying in touch, but his words drifted past James's ears. Derek and Laura passed by on the steps, and Derek had the gall to mutter, "Sorry it turned out this way, man," with a shrug that was anything but sorry. Laura didn't even look at James as they walked off together, heading toward Derek's car where the children waited inside. James stood there watching his family, drive away without him. That night, alone in his tiny apartment, James sat on the floor amid a sea of legal documents, financial statements, and photos of his children he'd brought from the house. He picked up a framed picture of Sophie and Liam at the beach, the same one that had been on his nightstand. His vision blurred with tears. Everything had been taken from him. His wife, his best friend, his home, even daily life with his kids. He had never felt so utterly defeated. The silence pressed in from the beige walls. He realized he had nowhere to be the next day. It was a Saturday, but his kids wouldn't be coming over. They were with Laura, and likely Derek, in the home that used to be his. An ugly thought crept into James's mind in that dark moment. What do I have left to live for? His career? It felt meaningless now, just a means to pay bills that mostly benefited Laura. His friends? Many had drifted or quietly sided with Laura and Derek once the new couple went public. He felt a surge of humiliation recalling how, not long after the divorce, he'd heard that Laura and Derek were attending neighborhood gatherings together. It was as if he had been erased and replaced. James slammed his fist into the side of the couch, choking on sobs that he could no longer hold back. Grief and fury swirled inside him, consuming every thought. He cried until he had no tears left, and still the ache persisted like a lead weight on his chest. At some point in the early hours, James found himself standing at the bathroom mirror. His reflection was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, a man broken. It frightened him how hollow he looked. He didn't recognize this defeated person staring back. In that emptiness, a spark of resolve flickered. He remembered Liam's tearful face, Sophie's guarded eyes. He wasn't truly alone. He still had his children, even if only part-time for now. They needed him, perhaps more than ever, if only he could pull himself together. Wiping his face with a rough paper towel, James inhaled shakily. "I'm still their father," he whispered to his reflection, voice hoarse. The man in the mirror looked a little less hollow as he said it. Yes, Laura had knocked him down to rock bottom. But for Sophie and Liam's sake, he couldn't stay there. If he did, he'd lose them completely. As the first light of dawn crept into the apartment, James Miller, heartbroken, humiliated, and exhausted, made a quiet vow to himself. I will not let this be the end of my story. Chapter 4. Gathering Strength. The first few months after the divorce were a trial by fire for James's spirit. But day by day, he inched forward, determined not to let despair consume him. He threw himself into improving every aspect of his life that he still had control over. James also threw himself into physical exercise. Morning runs and simple home workouts gradually burned away his stress and even some extra weight, rekindling a spark of confidence. He joined a weekly divorce support group and also began seeing a therapist. Opening up about his pain and hearing others' experiences gradually helped him process his anger and grief, piecing together his shattered self. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, his children came to stay for the weekend. At first, those visits were awkward and emotionally charged. On Friday evenings, James would anxiously tidy the small apartment and plan fun activities. A new board game for Sophie or materials for building a model rocket with Liam. He was determined that their time with him be full of warmth and stability. Yet initially, Sophie arrived sullen and quiet, barely engaging no matter how gentle and upbeat James tried to be. Liam was more forgiving. He would hug his father and chat, but even he would sometimes innocently say things that cut James to the core, like, "Mom says you work too much to take care of us every day." James never badmouthed Laura in response. He would simply reassure them that he loved them and treasured every moment he got to be with them. Over time, the kids began to relax around him again. They saw that at Dad's place there was no tension, no arguing, just his undivided attention. Slowly, Sophie started coming out of her shell. One night, a few months in, James found her curled up on the couch reading one of the old Harry Potter books they used to read together. He gently asked if she wanted to read aloud like old times, expecting a rebuff. But Sophie nodded, and as he sat beside her, she leaned her head on his shoulder. It was the first affectionate gesture she'd initiated since the split, and James had to blink back tears of gratitude before reading. Moments like those, small but precious, fueled his resolve to be the best father he could be, even if only part-time for now. All the while, James kept his eyes and ears open. He knew that the arrangement in place was far from just. He refused to accept that this lopsided custody and the injustice of it all was how things would remain, particularly as he started noticing worrying signs in his children. They often arrived from Laura's house looking tired or on edge. Sophie, once an A student, admitted quietly that her grades were slipping. "It's hard to concentrate sometimes," she said vaguely. Liam offhandedly mentioned more than once that Mom and Derek go out a lot at night, or that Derek was kind of mean sometimes when he's mad. James would gently probe for details, without pressing too hard. He learned that Laura frequently left the kids with a teenage babysitter, or her sister Melanie, while she and Derek traveled or attended events. Once, Liam revealed in a whisper that one night he woke up scared and couldn't find Mommy or Derek in the house. They had stepped out for a late dinner without waking the kids, leaving Melanie's teenage son dozing on the couch as the only supervision. Liam's eyes searched James's face as he shared this, as if unsure whether he was tattling. James kept his expression calm, but inside he was furious and horrified. He hugged his son and simply said, "Thank you for telling me, buddy. I'm always here if you're scared or need me." Each concerning revelation, James noted down in a private journal. Dates, times, incidents, small and large. He started documenting everything. The night Sophie mentioned she had to cook dinner for herself and Liam because Mom was busy with work calls. James suspected work calls was Laura's euphemism for dates or social outings. The soccer game Laura missed where Liam anxiously scanned the empty bleachers. The time James picked the kids up and noticed Sophie had on shoes 2 sizes too small because Laura hadn't taken her shopping in months. Each detail was a puzzle piece in a picture he was forming, one that showed that Laura's attention to motherhood had waned in favor of her own pursuits. Despite paying hefty child support, James found himself buying extra clothes and school supplies for the kids when he noticed the lack. He did it gladly, but it made him question. Where was the money going? The answer became apparent whenever he saw Laura around town. She often sported new designer handbags or jewelry and drove a shiny new SUV that Derek had ostensibly helped her buy. Neighbors reported that Laura and Derek hosted lavish parties, expensive wine flowing at what used to be James's home. It sickened him that his children were living in an environment of such misplaced priorities. After hearing one too many anecdotes from his kids about being brushed aside or left with sitters, James decided to take a more proactive step. He hired a private investigator, a discreet middle-aged man named Carl, who had a reputation for thoroughness. At first, James felt a bit guilty, as if spying on the mother of his children was dirty. But then he reminded himself, this was to protect Sophie and Liam. They deserved better than what they were getting. And given how craftily Laura had manipulated the legal system to her advantage once, James knew he would need ironclad evidence to turn the tables. Carl worked quietly over several months, tailing Laura and Derek's activities. His reports made James's blood boil at times. Photos of Laura dragging the kids to high-end boutiques, only to ignore them as she spent hours shopping for herself. A log of nights when Laura left the children in Derek's care at home while she went to a spa. Nights that, according to Sophie, often ended with her and Liam eating cereal for dinner because Derek stayed holed up in James's old study, doing God knows what instead of minding them. The investigator even managed to capture a telling incident one Saturday. Laura and Derek had an argument at a downtown restaurant during a brunch. Carl provided grainy photos of a red-faced Laura pointing an accusatory finger at Derek. They stormed out separately, leaving the kids, who had been sitting there with them, momentarily unattended and upset until Laura returned to gather them nearly half an hour later. James recalled how that evening when he got the kids, it had been his scheduled weekend, Sophie had been unusually withdrawn. Now he knew why. Parallel to gathering evidence on Laura's neglect, James also quietly inquired into Derek's professional affairs. Through Carl's investigation and a few industry whispers, James also uncovered evidence of Derek's professional misconduct, bribing clients, falsifying sales figures, even misappropriating company funds. One of Derek's key clients had recently and quietly severed ties amid whispers of fraud, and Carl managed to get copies of some financial records and emails that suggested Derek had indeed been siphoning money from joint accounts within his firm to finance personal expenditures, some of which, James noted wryly, likely ended up as the lavish gifts Laura enjoyed. Bit by bit, over nearly 2 years, James built a trove of information. He kept it organized in a secure digital folder and a locked binder. The binder grew thick with printed photos, reports, receipts, and notes. Every time he felt a temptation to lash out or succumb to bitterness, he would channel it into this careful preparation. He was playing the long game, and patience was key. During this time, James's own life blossomed in ways he hadn't anticipated. His dedication at work, despite all the turmoil, paid off. Seeing him refocus and excel, his boss entrusted him with larger clients and a promotion to team lead. The raise that came with it helped offset the financial strain of the support payments and investigator fees. James also managed to move from the cramped apartment to a slightly larger townhome rental after a year, one with an extra bedroom, so Sophie and Liam could each have their own space when they visited. He painted those bedrooms in the kids' favorite colors, sky blue for Liam, lavender for Sophie. On a weekend, they were with him, involving them in the process. They laughed as they all got smudged with paint, and that night, Sophie told him it was the most fun she'd had in a long time. Small victories like that reassured James that he was on the right path. By the time 2 full years had passed since the divorce, James was a changed man. Physically, he looked 5 years younger. He had even completed a half marathon, crossing the finish line with a triumphant fist in the air. Emotionally, therapy and time had tempered his pain into a steely resolve rather than volatile anguish. He had not dated anyone seriously. A few well-meaning friends tried setting him up, but James politely put off the idea for now, focusing on himself and his children. In truth, the idea of trusting someone romantically still felt daunting, but he hoped one day he would be ready. And with the passage of time, something unexpected happened. Sophie and Liam began to see through the cracks in their mother's facade. Sophie especially, now on the cusp of 15, had grown more aware of the family dynamics. She would occasionally confide in James during their weekends together, venting frustrations that she wouldn't dare voice to Laura. "Mom's never home lately," she muttered one evening, while helping James chop vegetables for dinner. "She says she's working or with Derek, but it just feels like we're not her priority." James had to bite his tongue to suppress any "I told you so" or visible satisfaction. His daughter's hurt was not something he took any joy in, even if it validated his concerns. Instead, he simply listened and said, "I'm sorry you're feeling that way. You and Liam should always be a priority." Sophie nodded and gave him a weary smile. Liam, sweet and trusting, still loved both his parents unconditionally, but even he sometimes asked innocently, "Dad, how come you're at all my games now, but Mom usually has something else to do?" James would just hug him and say both parents had busy lives and loved him very much, but inside it strengthened his conviction that a change was needed. That change was now within reach. James reviewed the binder of evidence late one night, under the lamp at his desk. He had timelines of incidents, photographs of concerning behavior, financial documents pointing to Laura's misuse of funds, and even a couple of signed affidavits. One from a neighbor who'd seen the kids left alone crying one night, and another from the soccer coach noting how rarely Laura attended important events for Liam. It was time to act. The next week, James scheduled a meeting with a new attorney he'd quietly vetted, a sharp family law specialist known for handling post-divorce custody modifications. As he laid out the evidence on her desk, even the seasoned lawyer raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "This is quite damning," she murmured, flipping through a series of photos showing Laura stumbling out of a bar late at night while supposedly the kids were at a sleepover. Carl had been thorough, even catching those details. James felt a grim satisfaction at her reaction. "I want to do this right," he said. "I've spent 2 years putting my life back together and making sure I can provide the best for my children. Meanwhile, their mother..." He gestured to the piles of evidence. "They deserve better than what they're getting." The lawyer nodded firmly. "I agree. We'll need to file a petition to modify custody, citing a significant change in circumstances and evidence of parental neglect. Given what you've shown me, I believe we have a strong case to at least get a hearing. And at that hearing, we'll lay all this out for the judge. James took a deep breath, a mix of nerves and hope swirling in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been patiently, meticulously preparing for. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Laura would undoubtedly fight viciously to keep what control she had. But he was no longer the broken man she had once crushed under her heel. He was stronger, smarter, and ready to fight for his kids and his own dignity. As he left the lawyer's office that day, the late afternoon sun felt warmer on his face than it had in a long time. James closed his eyes for a second and exhaled. This time, he thought with determination, I'm going to set things right. Chapter 5. Strategic Moves. 2 years and some months had passed since James lost almost everything in that courtroom. Now he found himself stepping into a similar courtroom once again, heart-pounding. But this time, he wasn't the one on the defensive. He was ready to go on the offensive, armed with truth. The hearing for the custody modification was scheduled on a bright spring morning. James arrived early with his attorney, who carried the thick binder of evidence they had compiled. Taking a seat at the petitioner's table, James smoothed his tie with slightly shaky hands. He glanced behind him. In the pews sat a few observers and a couple of friends he'd invited for moral support. When the doors opened to admit Laura and her entourage, James straightened his back. Laura walked in with Derek trailing protectively at her elbow and her attorney flanking her other side. She looked as polished as ever, but there was a strain to her face that hadn't been there a couple of years ago. Fine worry lines at the corners of her eyes. She avoided James's gaze as they took seats at the respondent's table. Derek sat behind her, arms crossed and scowling, as if this entire proceeding was a nuisance. Once proceedings began, James's attorney wasted no time. She addressed the court and laid out the request. They sought to modify custody due to a substantial change in circumstances and concerns about the children's well-being in their current living situation. Laura's lawyer countered that this was a baseless attempt by a bitter ex-husband to relitigate the divorce, but fell silent as James's side began presenting their evidence. A youth soccer coach testified that James attended every game while Laura often did not. On one occasion, Liam was left waiting nearly an hour after practice because no one showed up to pick him up until Laura arrived late from a spa appointment. This revelation drew a troubled frown from the judge. Next came financial and spending records. James's attorney calmly demonstrated that despite receiving ample child support, Laura had spent lavishly on personal luxuries while neglecting expenses for the children. There were receipts and bank statements showing purchases of designer clothes, expensive electronics, salon visits, far beyond what her own income could support, while school fees and clothing for the kids went unpaid or were covered by James. Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat as this came to light. Her attorney tried to object that how she spent her money was her business, but the judge overruled him, noting that misusing child support funds was certainly relevant to parental responsibility. Then came the photographs and PI reports. James's lawyer introduced dated images and observations. Laura returning home intoxicated in the middle of the night on an evening the children were left with a neighbor. Laura and Derek vacationing at a resort during a period she told the court she was too ill to have the kids. A photo of the children gazing out a window alone after dark. The night Laura and Derek went to a gala downtown, leaving them with only a dozing teen babysitter. Each item landed heavily. The judge's frown deepened. At one point, she looked up and asked, "Where were the parents on this night?" The answer, "At a charity gala, Your Honor, while the children were left at home unattended," hung in the courtroom air like a reproach. A court-appointed child advocate relayed that Sophie loved both parents but felt like her mother wasn't there for her, and that she felt more comfortable and supported at her father's home. Liam was too young to state a strong preference, but even he had innocently expressed that he wished his mom wasn't so busy all the time when he needed her. Finally, James took the stand to speak for himself. He described how, in the 2 years since the divorce, he had reorganized his life around his children. He talked of flexible work hours that allowed him to be at every school pickup and event, of nights helping with homework and cooking healthy meals, of the stable routine and loving environment he maintained. His voice trembled with emotion as he expressed his worry about the neglect the kids experienced at Laura's home. "I'm not here to attack my ex-wife," he said, looking the judge in the eye. "I'm here because I want what's best for Sophie and Liam. I believe that's with me. They need consistency, supervision, and most of all, to feel like a priority. I can give them that." Laura had her turn to respond. She took the stand and tried to defend herself, though her earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated. She tearfully insisted that she loved her children and never intended to neglect them. Yes, she had struggled to balance work and personal life, but she argued that James was painting an unfair picture, amplifying her mistakes and ignoring that the children were healthy and doing fine overall. She claimed the kids' grades were mostly okay. The advocate's report contradicted this, and that they never went hungry or uncared for. Her attorney prompted her to emphasize that she had been the primary parent for years and that changing custody would be disruptive to the children. Under cross-examination, Laura grew defensive. James's lawyer methodically went through the documented incidents. "Mrs. Miller, is it true that your children missed their dentist appointments last year because you forgot to schedule them, and Mr. Miller had to arrange new appointments when he found out?" Laura flushed. I was overwhelmed that week. It was an oversight." "And the school meeting in which neither you nor Mr. Thompson showed up to discuss Sophie's falling grades?" the lawyer continued. "Mr. Miller ended up meeting the teacher separately." Laura mumbled something about a work commitment, but it sounded feeble. Perhaps the most damning moment was when James's attorney asked Laura directly, "Miss Miller, would you say that since the divorce, your personal life, your relationship, social activities, and so forth, often took precedence over your responsibilities as a parent?" Laura bristled. "No, I wouldn't say that. I always made sure my kids were looked after." "Even if it meant by babysitters or relatives while you were away?" the attorney pressed. A flicker of anger crossed Laura's face. "Parents are allowed to have help sometimes. That doesn't make me a bad mother." The judge interjected quietly. "No one said you are a bad mother, Miss Miller. But we are here to determine what custody arrangement is in the best interest of the children going forward. Please answer the questions directly." Laura swallowed hard and fell silent, unable to effectively counter the mountain of evidence and concerns presented. After closing arguments, Laura's lawyer entreating the court not to punish his client for a few lapses, and James's lawyer highlighting the clear pattern of behavior and the children's needs. The judge called for a brief recess to deliberate. When court reconvened, everyone held their breath. James's hands were clenched together so tightly his knuckles were white. Laura looked pale, her eyes shiny with tears she was fighting to hold back. Derek, in the back, stared at the floor. After a brief deliberation, the judge delivered her decision. Citing the children's best interests and the substantial evidence of Laura's neglect, she awarded James primary custody of Sophie and Liam. His child support obligations were terminated. Furthermore, noting Laura's improved financial prospects and the living situation, the judge significantly reduced the alimony and ordered it to end entirely after a short transition period of 6 months. There was a stunned silence in the courtroom. James closed his eyes, a wave of relief and triumph washing over him. "It's done. I won." Emotion welled in his chest. A strangled sob broke the silence, Laura trembling as she gripped the edge of her table. Derek put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off and covered her face. The judge finalized the new custody schedule and adjourned the session. For a moment, James sat frozen, hardly daring to believe it. Then a small hand slipped into his. He looked down to see Liam standing beside him. Melanie had quietly brought the kids into the courtroom when the decision was being read. On James's other side, Sophie hovered, her eyes brimming with what looked like joy and relief. "It's okay, Dad," Liam whispered, as if reassuring him. James exhaled shakily and gathered both children into his arms. He hugged them tightly, right there in front of everyone. "It's more than okay," he managed to say, voice thick. "We're going to be together now." Sophie pulled back slightly and looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We get to live with you?" she asked softly, as if she too couldn't quite believe it, until he confirmed. "Yes," James nodded, smiling through his tears. "You're coming home with me." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, then threw her arms around him again. "I'm so glad," Sophie whispered, squeezing him fiercely. "I missed being home." Liam was already jumping up and down, too young to fully grasp legal proceedings, but excited by the emotional cues. James scooped him up and pressed a kiss to his forehead, then slung an arm around Sophie as well. Across the aisle, Laura rose on unsteady feet. Her face was streaked with tears, disbelief, and devastation written plainly on her features. As James walked out with the children, his children, by his side, he caught Laura's eye for the briefest moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. James gave her a polite, almost sad nod. There was no gloating in his gaze, only a tired acknowledgement. Laura had fought viciously, but in the end, her own actions had caught up with her. He turned away and guided Sophie and Liam out of the courtroom, leaving Laura and Derek behind. The spring sun was bright on his face as they stepped outside. Sophie slipped her hand into James's, and Liam skipped a step ahead, chattering about how he wanted to decorate his new room at Dad's house. James felt a deep gratitude in that moment. He had walked into this courthouse 2 years ago, a broken man, and left defeated. Today he walked out victorious, his children's hands in his. As they reached his car, Sophie suddenly gave James another hug. "I love you, Dad," she said softly. "I love you too, sweetheart," James replied, kissing the top of her head. He looked at both his children, finally back with him, finally safe. His eyes stung with happy tears. "We're going to be okay. All of us." And for the first time in a very long while, James truly believed that. Chapter 6. Turning the tables. In the weeks following the custody victory, life took on a brighter hue for James and his children. The townhouse rang with laughter and lively chatter that had been absent for far too long. Sophie and Liam settled into their new routines with remarkable ease. Sophie's grades improved dramatically now that she had a stable environment and James's support with homework each night. Liam seemed more carefree than ever, his occasional anxieties fading as he spent time in a home filled with attention and love. Often, James would pause in the middle of some mundane task, cooking dinner while Sophie set the table and Liam fed scraps to the dog they had adopted, and marvel at how far they had all come. For the first time in years, he felt a profound peace. He had what mattered most, his family under his roof, safe and happy. But James had not forgotten that there was one loose end in this saga of betrayal and justice. Derek Thompson had yet to reap what he had sown. The man had not only violated James's trust in the worst way, but he had stood by as Laura tried to strip James of everything, even aiding her. James could have left it at regaining custody, but a part of him, a part that remembered every ounce of humiliation and pain, knew that Derek deserved to face consequences too. Late one evening, after Sophie and Liam had gone to bed, James sat at his desk and opened his laptop. With methodical precision, he crafted a series of emails. Over the past year, he had quietly gathered documentation of Derek's questionable business activities, emails from whistleblowers, copies of financial statements showing irregularities, even a recorded phone conversation that Carl had managed to obtain where Derek discussed creative accounting to mislead a client. It was more than enough to raise alarms among those who dealt with Derek professionally. James composed the messages as anonymous tips. He addressed one to the board of directors of Derek's firm, highlighting evidence of embezzlement and false reporting. Another was sent to 2 of Derek's largest clients, outlining how Derek had likely overcharged them and providing a trail of proof for their accountants to follow. He made sure to use a fresh, untraceable email account and routed it through a privacy service. There would be no way to directly tie it to him. Satisfied, he hit send on each, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. It was out of his hands now. The truth would do the damage. The fallout began shortly thereafter. At first, James heard snippets through the industry grapevine. He still worked in finance, and word travels fast in those circles. One colleague mentioned that Derek Thompson's company was undergoing an internal audit amid some allegations. A friend forwarded James a link to a business news blog speculating that a certain regional sales manager had been suspended pending investigation into financial improprieties. The blog didn't name names, but James had no doubt who it referred to. Then, concrete news arrived. A formal press release from Derek's firm announced that Derek Thompson was no longer with the company, effective immediately. No reason was given publicly, but one could read between the lines. Soon after, one of Derek's biggest clients filed a lawsuit accusing him of fraud. Derek's professional world was imploding. One afternoon, as James was wrapping up work at home, he often worked remotely now to be there when the kids returned from school, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously. It was Derek, and he was furious. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Derek's voice practically crackled over the line, dripping with venom. "I know it was you, James. Who else would pull this crap?" James felt a cold calm settle over him. He quietly stepped out onto the back patio, out of earshot of the kids who were upstairs doing homework. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he replied evenly. "Bullshit!" Derek snarled. "My career is in ruins. Don't play dumb. You just couldn't stand to see me and Laura happy, could you? You had to come after everything once you got the kids." He was practically spitting with rage. For a moment, listening to Derek's tirade, James recalled a memory from years ago. Derek clapping him on the back at a barbecue, laughing, calling him brother as they sipped beers. How far things had fallen. When Derek paused, perhaps expecting James to lash back, James spoke softly, with an icy edge that made Derek fall silent. "Derek, let's get one thing straight. You destroyed everything long before I ever took action. You chose to sleep with my wife. You chose to try to step into my life, into my family, as if it were your right. And you chose to conduct your business dishonestly. So whatever's happening to you now, it's not my doing. It's the consequences of your own choices coming home to roost." There was a heavy silence on the other end. When Derek spoke again, his tone shifted from anger to a sort of desperate pleading. "You got what you wanted, man. You have the kids, you have your little victory. Why couldn't you just leave it at that? You're going to ruin me financially. I could face charges." His voice wavered. It sounded like he might be on the verge of panicking. James closed his eyes, not out of sympathy, but to keep his resolve steady. "I owe you nothing," he said, each word measured. "You showed no mercy when you helped Laura try to ruin me. Did you hesitate when she demanded the house, the money, my time with my kids? Did you ever think of mercy then? Because I recall you sitting in that courtroom, looking very pleased with yourselves." Derek said nothing, which was as good as an admission. James continued, voice low. "I didn't put any lies into the world about you. I simply let the truth be known to those who deserve to know it. If that truth ruins you, that's on you. I have nothing more to say to you, and I'd better never hear from you again." He hung up, his hand trembling slightly. For a long moment he stood on the patio, breathing in the cool air. Surprisingly, he didn't feel elated or vindicated. If anything, he felt a grim sense of closure. Derek had made his bed. Now he would lie in it. And lie in it, he did. Word got around that Derek, under immense pressure and disgraced in his field, had left town to start fresh elsewhere. In the chaos of Derek's downfall, his relationship with Laura also disintegrated. James learned through a mutual acquaintance that the stress had turned Derek cruel and distant. He began lashing out, and before long, Derek and Laura had a screaming fight that ended with him walking out on her. The man Laura had betrayed her family for had abandoned her at her lowest point. Without Derek's income and support, Laura's luxurious lifestyle collapsed swiftly. The fancy SUV was repossessed. Creditors started calling about unpaid bills. The lavish shopping sprees and expensive salon appointments ceased overnight. By necessity, Laura sold the 5-bedroom suburban house. She could no longer afford the mortgage on her own, not with the dramatically reduced alimony and no Derek to supplement her. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town, a place she could manage on her own salary from her part-time design work, and a new job she picked up at a home decor store. James observed these developments from a careful distance. He never celebrated Laura's misfortunes, especially knowing their children were also affected by the instability. In fact, he made efforts to cushion the impact on Sophie and Liam. When Laura tearfully informed him that she had to move and that the kids would no longer have their old bedrooms at her place, James helped by taking the kids to pick out new bedding and decorations for the room they'd share at their mom's smaller apartment. He reassured them that home was wherever they all felt loved, not a particular house. One evening, during a routine custody exchange at a neutral spot, Laura approached James. She looked tired and thin, dressed in simple clothes, her once perfectly manicured nails now unadorned. As Sophie and Liam climbed into James's car, Laura cleared her throat. "James, can I talk to you for a second?" James, who had been opening the driver's door, paused and walked a few steps aside with her. "Yes?" Up close, Laura's eyes were red-rimmed. She seemed to struggle with what to say. "I just wanted to thank you." James blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Thank me?" Laura nodded, swallowing. "For not turning the kids against me, for letting them still see me. You didn't have to be generous about it, but you have been. I know I don't deserve it." James was quiet for a moment. He saw genuine remorse and gratitude in her expression. "They need both their parents," he said simply. "I wouldn't take them from you. I just needed them safe." Laura gave a weak smile and looked down. "They are safe with you. They're thriving, actually. And I'm glad. They have you." James wasn't sure how to respond. This was a far cry from the defiant, spiteful Laura, who had once vowed to take everything from him. "Take care of yourself, Laura," he finally said. It was not quite forgiveness, but it was sincere. She nodded. As James turned to go, she added softly, "You're a good man, James." He glanced back, and for the first time in years, he saw in her face a flicker of the woman he used to know, the one capable of kindness and love, now tempered by hard-earned humility. Driving home with the kids, James felt an unexpected twinge of pity for Laura. She had, in the span of 2 years, lost nearly everything she thought she wanted. Her marriage, her luxurious lifestyle, even the adulterous partner she'd left it all for. Now she was left to rebuild from scratch, just as he had been. The difference was, James had built something better in place of what was broken. Laura was still searching for her footing. That night, after tucking in a sleepy Liam and bidding goodnight to Sophie, who was busy texting friends, James sat on the couch and allowed himself to reflect. The drive for revenge that had fueled him for so long had finally burnt out. Derek was gone from their lives, Laura had faced her reckoning, and most importantly, Sophie and Liam were where they belonged. The anger and bitterness he once harbored had cooled. In its place was a steady resolve to move forward and be happy. He realized he had done it. He had protected his family and reclaimed his life. The chapter of vengeance was over. Now, another chapter was quietly beginning, one filled with healing, new love, and hope for the future, even if he didn't fully see it yet. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. Over the next year, life settled into a comfortable, joyful rhythm for James and his children. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by hope and new experiences. It was during this period of calm that James met Angela. It happened on a Saturday morning at the local park. James had taken Liam and Sophie to volunteer for a community tree planting event. Giving back was something he was keen on instilling in them. Angela was one of the event organizers, an attractive woman in her late 30s with a warm smile and an easy laugh. She had a natural rapport with the kids, showing Liam how to pat down the soil around a sapling and complimenting Sophie on how deftly she handled a shovel. When James stepped in to help, muddy and slightly out of breath, Angela grinned. "You've got a couple of hard workers there," she remarked, nodding at the children. "Yeah, they're pretty great," James replied, smiling proudly. Over water breaks and casual conversation, they got to know each other. Angela mentioned she was a school counselor at a nearby high school, which explained her way with kids. She was single, having gone through a tough breakup a while back, and spent many weekends organizing community projects. James found her outlook on life refreshing, optimistic yet grounded. There was a gentle strength in her that drew him in. After that day, James found himself thinking about Angela, and apparently the feeling was mutual. She called him a week later to discuss an upcoming tree care workshop, and that call turned into a coffee date, which turned into dinner a few days after. Conversation flowed easily. James spoke about Sophie and Liam, and carefully, bits of his past. He mentioned a difficult divorce, but not all the gory details at first. And Angela shared stories of her college travels and her passion for helping kids through her counseling. As months passed, their bond deepened. Angela became a steady presence in James's life, a source of understanding and warmth. She knew he had been hurt deeply, and she never pushed him to reveal more than he was ready to. Yet slowly, piece by piece, James opened up to her about everything. Laura's affair, the brutal divorce, the battle for custody, even the role he played in Derek's downfall. He half expected Angela to be shocked or put off by these revelations of the turmoil he'd been through, but she responded only with compassion. One evening, after he finished recounting the whole saga, Angela's eyes glistened with tears. She reached out and took James's hand. "You've been through hell and back," she said softly. "But here you are, kind, devoted, and stronger than ever. That says so much about who you are." In that moment, James realized he loved her. He hadn't thought it possible to love someone again, after all the betrayal and loss, but here it was, quiet and certain. Angela's presence in his world was like a gentle light, illuminating a future he never thought he'd have again. Not just survival, but genuine happiness, and even the promise of love after heartbreak. Sophie and Liam took to Angela with ease, which was a relief and a blessing to James. Angela didn't try to be their mother or push her way into their lives. She was simply there, attending Liam's soccer games with homemade snacks for the team, or helping Sophie practice for debate club, or joining in on family board game nights. James often watched in amazement at how naturally Angela fit. She treated the children with kindness and respect, and they, in turn, clearly adored her. One autumn afternoon, Angela and James took the kids hiking on a scenic trail outside the city. As Sophie and Liam walked ahead, kicking up red and gold leaves, Angela slipped her hand into James's. "You look happy," she said, her brown eyes warm and sincere. James realized he was happy. He squeezed her hand gently. "I am happy," he replied with a smile. For the first time in a very long time, he felt at peace with the world. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. His life was filled with love and purpose again. About a year into James and Angela's relationship, an unexpected message from Laura arrived. She called one evening and asked if James would meet her for coffee, just the two of them. It was unusual. Since the custody change, their interactions had been limited to cordial small talk during child exchanges or occasional texts about scheduling. James felt a flicker of apprehension, but also curiosity. He agreed. They met on a Sunday afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. James arrived first and chose a corner table. He wasn't sure how he'd feel seeing Laura in a one-on-one setting again, without the buffer of lawyers or children. But when she walked in, he felt surprisingly calm. Laura approached the table, offering a tentative smile. She looked nervous and a little worn, but she had a softness to her expression that he hadn't seen in a long time. "Hi, James," she greeted quietly. "Hi, Laura," he replied. They sat. For a minute, they just stirred their coffees, not knowing where to begin. Finally, Laura took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to talk about everything." James waited, giving her space to continue. She blinked rapidly, already fighting tears. "First, I need to apologize. I know I've said sorry before, but I need to really say it. I am so sorry for what I did to you, to us, to our family." Her voice wavered. "Cheating on you with Derek, trying to take everything in the divorce. It was horrible. I was horrible. You didn't deserve any of it." James nodded slowly. He had heard versions of this apology over time, but never so directly and earnestly. "Thank you for saying that," he responded. "I forgave you for it, you know. Not at first, but eventually. I had to, for my own sake and for the kids. I couldn't carry that anger forever." A tear rolled down Laura's cheek. "You forgave me?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "In my heart, yes," James said softly. "I won't ever forget what happened, but I decided to let go of the hate. It was only hurting me and the people I love." Laura pressed a napkin to her eyes. "You've always been better than I deserved." She took a shuddering breath. "I also wanted to thank you, properly, for how you've handled things since. You never turned Sophie and Liam against me. You've let me still be their mother. A lot of men wouldn't have after what I did. But you even encouraged them to spend time with me. I know that's for them, not me, but still. Thank you." James glanced away, a bit overwhelmed. "They need their mom," he said simply. "I'd never take them away from you unless they were in danger. I appreciate that you've been trying harder for them lately." Laura managed a faint smile at that. She fiddled with her coffee cup, gathering courage for what came next. "I have to ask you something, even if it might be too late and too much." She looked up, eyes pleading. "Is there any chance at all for us to be together again? To be a family under one roof?" Despite having anticipated this possibility, James felt a pang of sadness for her as she asked. He could see how hard it was for her to voice it. Before he could answer, Laura rushed on. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I'm the one who blew our life apart. But I've realized, especially seeing you now with the kids, seeing how happy you all are. I realized what I lost and what I threw away. Maybe it's foolish, but I had to ask if there's even a sliver of hope that you could ever love me again, that we could try to put our family back together." Tears were spilling freely down her face now. James felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table and gently took her hand, both to comfort and to steady himself for what he needed to say. "Laura, I care about you. You're the mother of my children, and I truly wish the best for you. But us, that chapter is over." She closed her eyes, a tear dropping onto the back of his hand. He continued softly, "Too much has happened. Too much has been broken. I can't get back the trust that was lost, and honestly, I don't want to. I've moved forward. I'm in a different place now." Laura opened her eyes and nodded faintly. "There's someone else, isn't there?" she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie mentioned a lady you've been seeing. Angela?" James gave a small smile at the mention of Angela's name. "Yes, Angela. We've been together for a while. I didn't plan it, but I love her. And the kids adore her. She's really wonderful." Laura absorbed that, wiping her cheeks. "I'm happy for you," she said, and seemed to mean it, however bittersweet it clearly was for her to hear. "I'm glad you found someone who appreciates you the way you deserve." "Thank you," James replied. He squeezed her hand, then let it go gently. "I hope you understand. I can't be what you're looking for anymore, but I'll always be your friend, and I'll always be your co-parent. We share Sophie and Liam, and we both love them. That's never going to change. Laura offered a trembling smile. That means a lot. More than I deserve. She took a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. I kind of knew what your answer would be, but I I had to ask. For my own conscience, I guess. I know, James said softly, and I'm glad you did. It took courage. She gave a watery chuckle. Not as much as it took for you to survive what I did to you. I truly am sorry, James. I hope one day you can fully forgive me. Not for me, but so you're free of any lingering hurt I caused. I forgave you already, James repeated gently. Any lingering hurt. Well, life has a way of healing if you let it. I have a good life now. I'm happy. I want you to find happiness too, Laura. I really do. Laura's eyes brimmed again, but she blinked away the tears. You've changed so much, she said softly. Or maybe this is who you were all along, and I just didn't see it. You're a good man, James. The best I ever knew. He felt a stir of old affection for the woman she had been, but there was no romantic love left, only compassion. Take care of yourself, he told her sincerely. Things will get better if you keep doing right by the kids and by yourself. She nodded. They exchanged a few more polite words, then decided it was time to go. They stood and awkwardly hugged, a brief, gentle embrace that spoke of forgiveness and farewell more than anything else. Goodbye, James, Laura whispered. Goodbye, Laura, he replied, stepping back. He watched her walk away down the street, shoulders a little hunched against the chill. A chapter of their lives had truly closed in that moment. There were no more loose ends, no more unresolved questions between them. James felt a weight lift that he hadn't realized he was still carrying. That night, back at home, James sat on the porch swing with Angela, recounting the conversation. She listened quietly, her hand resting on his. When he finished, Angela looked up at him with concern. Are you all right? James thought for a moment, then nodded. I am. It was hard, in a way. But I feel free of it now. Angela smiled softly. I'm proud of you. It takes a big heart to forgive like you did. James wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. The night was cool, but her warmth against him kept the chill away. I couldn't have done it without all the support I've had. From you, from the kids, even from going through what I went through. It changed me, but in the end, maybe it needed to. Angela tipped her head up to kiss his cheek. You deserve every happiness, James. Inside the house, laughter echoed faintly. Sophie and Liam watching a funny video together before bed. James gazed through the porch's screen door at the cozy glow of the living room where his children were. This was his world now. Honest, hard-won, and full of love. On the fireplace mantel in that living room sat a new family photo. In it, James stands at the center with an arm around Sophie and an arm around Liam, all three of them grinning ear to ear. And just to the side, leaning happily into the frame, is Angela, with one of Liam's arms draped over her shoulder and Sophie holding her hand. They all look content and close, because they are. It wasn't the picture-perfect family James once thought he had, but it was something real and true, born out of resilience and love. James looked at Angela, then back through the door at his kids. He felt a surge of pride and fulfillment. The illusion of happiness he once lived had been shattered, yes. But in its place, something real and enduring had been built. He had risen from betrayal stronger and happier than before. The end.